Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the November 20th Worcester Township Board of Supervisors business meeting. Would you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance?
Look to the flag, United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My name is Rick DeLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my left is Lou Betts, who's our vice chair. To my right is Steve Quigley, who's our third member. Over on the side table in the front, we have Wendy McKenna, who is here from our solicitor's office. We have Nicole, who is our finance director. On the back table, we have uh, Dan Domeno, who is our township manager, and Christian Jones, who is our assistant township manager. And the front here, we also have Michelle Fallon, who is from CKS, which is our township engineer. First and foremost, does anybody have any informational items for the board tonight?
Yes, Mr. Chair. This meeting is being recorded for future broadcast.
Thank you, Christian. So, folks, just a little bit on the mechanics of tonight, because it's a little bit of a unique meeting in the sense that we have a presentation initially on the budget that Nicole is going to be doing. There's also going to be some slides with that, Dan. Is that my understanding? Okay. So we're going to go through that, and then after that budget presentation, we'll then have public comment. That's an opportunity for folks. If you have any comments specific to the budget presentation, that's fine, or any other items, that's where we're going to have the public comment period, and then we'll move into the other items of the agenda. So first and foremost, Nicole, the floor is yours on the issue of the budget. Just make sure you're wired up and ready to go.
First, starting with taxes, the budget includes no new taxes and no increase to existing taxes. Worcester Township's real estate tax rate is proposed to remain at 1/20th of 1 mil, which is presently the lowest municipal tax rate in Montgomery County. And I expect that we will continue to have the lowest tax rate in 2025. For personnel, at this time, the Public Works Director does not believe an additional full-time labor will be needed in the coming year. As for administration, the proposed 2025 budget includes the hire of one additional full-time administrative specialist position to help alleviate strain on our current staff. As for the general fund, first and foremost, this is balanced. At this time, the EIT, our primary revenue, is projected to receive $3.5 million. The budget includes $250,000 in real estate transfer tax in the coming year. $430,000 is projected for this year. This number assumes the number of transfers of existing residential properties and no transfers of commercial properties and larger tracts of land, which historically have occurred on an infrequent basis. As to expenditures, health insurance premiums will be kept at the level of 2021. This is made possible by the use of rate stabilization funds earned by the township's positive claims experience with a multi-municipal nonprofit trust for health insurance to which we are a member. The budget includes a 5% increase to our annual operating contribution to our volunteer fire department to $193,930. And there will also be a capital contribution in the amount of $172,000. This number does not include the cost of workers' compensation coverage that is provided by the township as is required by state law. Nor does this number include the Act 205 pass-through aid to the Department's Relief Association, which was received in the month of September and is budgeted at approximately $106,000. Lastly, the general fund will transfer dollars to the capital fund at the end of next year. This number will provide for needed capital projects. The transfer amount will continue to change and be refined, but approximately it will be about $700 $67,000. For the capital fund, at the top of the list of capital projects is the annual road program. The township will continue to provide an augmented resurfacing program, which will help to keep our roads in good condition, maximizing the useful life of the network. The capital fund will provide $721,000 towards the road program, which, when coupled with dollars from our liquid fuels fund, will provide $1.1 million towards the road program in 2025. Some capital improvements included in the budget for parks and trails include repairing the Sunnybrook Pavilion roof, several upgrades to Heiser Field, the paving of Zacharias Trail, and repairing the fences at Heebner and Sunnybrook Park. Lastly, the capital fund will provide for the replacement of public works vehicles and equipment that have reached the end of their useful life. This includes the replacement of a pickup truck, a dump truck, and a mower. The capital budget also includes the purchase of a portable fuel cell and a mobile aerial lift. These new equipment not only streamlines our workflow, but also ensures that we can tackle projects in-house with greater precision and effectiveness. Some highlights from the sewer fund. As to sewer rates, the budget presently includes a 1% increase to residential rates in 2025, which translates to approximately 50 cents per month increase for each home on the township system. A 1% increase to commercial sewer rates is also proposed. The sewer fund currently provides $90,000 for capital improvements throughout the coming year. Just like our roadway network, the sanitary sewer system requires regular upkeep to maximize the useful life of its many components. Things like blowers, pumps, and meters will need to be replaced in order to keep our pump stations running efficiently. For our liquid fuels fund, the estimated 2025 allocation was received last month, and it was a total of $355,778. For many municipalities, the liquid fuels allocation is the annual road maintenance budget. Worcester does not adopt that approach. As previously mentioned, we budget additional dollars in both the general fund and the capital fund to meet our obligations. We will therefore offset any decrease in liquid fuels funding with additional dollars from the capital fund. The next steps. This evening, the board will consider authorization to advertise the 2025 budget for the required 20-day public inspection period. The budget will be available at the township building, and it also has been posted to our website. The board will then consider the 2025 budget for adoption at its December 18th business meeting.
Thank you, Nicole. So as some folks have been here the last few months, we had a presentation in September regarding the budget. We had a presentation in October. What's going to happen tonight in our regular business session, we'll have a motion to advertise the budget so that we can then adopt the budget in our December monthly business meeting. We've talked about this the past couple of months. Let me start to either side. Do either of you have any specific comments regarding the budget? Do you have any questions, any areas that you want to address?
Rick, the only thing I think a lot of residents can confuse is the use of liquid fuels tax and, doing the roads. Dan, if you can just go over our roads versus state road versus county roads and who pays for what and what do we repair. I think a lot of people think the roads in Worcester are repaired by the Worcester residents through the taxes, but there's a lot of other state and county roads that run through our township that we're not responsible for fixing.
Correct, yeah. So we do have obviously a pretty extensive road network. There's a mixture, as you said, of state, county, and local roads. Our Public Works Department handles local roads. PennDOT handles state roads, and Montgomery County handles county roads. The primary roads you might be thinking of, Valley Forge Road is a state road. Germantown Pike is generally a state road, but where it passes through Worcester is actually a county road, which I found out when I got here. So, there is a list under our Public Works Department available online that has a complete breakdown of every road in the township and what their categorization is. So if there's any question on who needs to be contacted for what, it would be a really good starting spot. But I would encourage residents, if they're unsure, just call us at the township building and we'll be happy to get any issues with a state or county road to the proper areas.
And for most of the township roads, the general patching or filling potholes in, we usually do that in-house. But for the larger paving jobs, and we go through a development or doing the major projects, that's contracted out to independent contractors through a bidding process, correct?
Correct. It's an independent bidding process that we conduct in accordance with all state regulations for the larger stuff. The day-to-day patching, as you said, is done by our public works crew at need.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lou, do you have any questions or comments regarding the presentation or the budget in general?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I don't have anything specific. We've talked about staffing a little bit. We've talked about sort of the general conservative nature that we try to take with budgeting year to year, and the ability to, as a result, typically transfer a fair amount of money into the capital reserves for future needs and those sorts of things. Again, just for clarification, folks, we'll be voting later tonight to advertise the budget, so it has the 20-day period for public consumption and comments, and then we would look to adopt the budget at our December meeting. So at this point, we're good with the budget piece, but I am gonna ask you to just hang tight there, Nicole, in case anybody who comes and has a question in public comment that we can answer, certainly we'd like to try to do that. So with that, I will move to public comment. We do ask that you limit your public comment to 5 minutes. Does anybody have any public comment for the board this evening? In the front here. So any public comment, you actually need to, I know you came in on crutches, I apologize, but you do need to come to the table, let us know. Public comment can be on any topic. It does not need to be specific to the budget. We had that as an informational item, and we did it in front of the public comment so folks could make comments on that, but you could make a public comment on any topic that you, we need to get you on the recording. If somebody, unfortunately, we would ask that you come forward. I apologize for that.
Held up.
If you can sign in so we have a record there.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Laurie Kish,
Thank you.
and I live at 126 Rendell Court,
Okay.
and I'm in Stony Creek Farm. So the back of my home is adjacent to Whitehall Road. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. Approximately 2+ years ago, I began to hear construction noises from behind my home on Whitehall Road. I'm here with several of my neighbors tonight, but from my own experience, over time, more and more equipment showed up on this property. The noises escalated from sounds of heavy construction equipment and their backup beeps, chainsaws, and to what my ears perceive as the sounds of crashing metal. I've noticed this tends to happen in the spring to fall when the leaves are out. The equipment beeps and loud metal crashing sounds have occurred more frequently and even wake me up at times in the middle of the night. More often this occurs before daylight early. I ask myself, why run construction vehicles in the middle of the night? Over the years, unbeknownst to me, several other neighbors had reached out to the township to ask what is going on. The township, we were informed this property is zoned agriculturally, intended as a tree farm. While our expressed concerns to the township have been largely noise and health-based, I'd like to express my concern to make a plea for the integrity of the land and water flowing through Stony Creek, its watershed and natural habitats. I no longer see blue herons, eagles, or fox back there. Now what I see are various yellow and orange metal, fencing, heavy equipment, a new parking lot, and many trucks. Last week, I'm guessing I saw a 3-story boom piece of equipment truck. I'm here to ask the township to please bring us up to date on what appears to be zoning violations. And I'm wondering if anyone has gone out to the property since the several previous township managers were fired.
So the short answer is yes, in terms of that. I'm going to hand it over to Dan in a minute. I'll add, to give you a little bit of an update. We are aware, the township is aware. The township is engaged with the resident, has been engaged with the resident for some time. Let me start by saying, and I'll speak for both gentlemen to either side of me, we always want a resident to come into compliance to whatever the zoning is for the particular property. And if they have a requirement beyond that, then we would want them to seek what we would call zoning relief at the zoning board if that's a necessary step. But ultimately, we are aware of the situation and have been working with the resident. And I'm going to ask Dan to sort of take through the time a little. It did start at a previous township manager, so it did get handed off a little bit. But certainly the township's been engaged and working through various steps with the resident that also now have deadlines as well associated with them so that we can look to bring the resident into compliance with the zoning, and that there's some steps that are involved with that. So Dan, maybe you could just take a minute to sort of take it up here and then bring it down a little. I know we've taken some specific steps. I know there have been a couple of meetings and there's been documentation and just sort of what you can share to sort of bring the audience up to speed.
Yeah, so we did engage with the resident. I have done that directly. We did ask for a plan that shows exactly what the status of that property is from a structural, impervious coverage, et cetera. We reviewed that plan with our engineer, and we have sent a response letter outlining our concerns about what we've seen in that plan. They have a deadline in early December to get back with us with ultimately how they are going to make this site conform to township zoning rules and regulations. So that is where we're at right now. You know, it kind of moves at the speed of government sometimes, which is not always as fast as anybody would like, but we are setting timeframes and, you know, hard stops on making sure that we get this property into compliance in the long term and hopefully short term.
May I ask a question?
You may, if we can answer it, we're happy to. We may not have the answer
Right,
for you.
may not be able to. Is there any other government entities involved, like the county or the EPA or the state or anything?
So short answer again is yes. The county has been involved. And I'm going to say that probably wrong, and maybe Wendy, conservation. It's
Montgomery County Conservation District.
there we go. So yes, they have been involved as well because of the amount of land that is involved in making sure that is also they're complying with whatever county requirements. That's where they work more with the stormwater management piece of it. So some of your concerns with the water, where the water might be going, and those sorts of things, they have been involved. There's also, is there not a highway occupancy permit also that is involved as well? Because it's
So there's a
state
couple
road?
layers.
Okay.
So the Montgomery County Conservation District does not have enforcement powers, but they do work hand in hand with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, who does have strong enforcement powers. Secondly, there is a federal level permit called an NPDES permit that is required anytime that there's more than an acre of impervious coverage added. So there are many layers of government involved here, from local all the way to federal, and we remain in contact with all of those agencies and work in tandem with them to enforce the rules out there.
I will just like to say one final thing, that
Sure.
I do understand that he has planted some trees, but I don't believe that tree farm was the intention, only because it didn't take 2.5 years of this noise and this construction to plant, I don't know how many trees, I shouldn't say, that were done maybe this past month.
Fair enough.
I just wanted to, and bring your attention to, this is going on in the middle of the night and early in the morning in the dark. That was my,
Understood. We certainly hear you, and we certainly appreciate you coming to speak with us as well. And I'm sorry to hear about your mishap in terms of that.
like the postal service, I'm gonna get here no matter what.
You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Third Wednesday of every month, and I will apologize in advance that it doesn't happen in a day. You know, working through these processes takes time, and we're sending information to the resident and the resident's engineer and their legal counsel are then sending things back to us, and we're working through that process. But we do recognize it's an issue and concern, and certainly have been working to try to get it under control and get to a better resolution. Does anybody, Steve or Lou, I know you've had some involvement, I don't know.
Yeah, Rick, I sat on the Montgomery County Conservation District Board for 20 years, and they do a really good job with developments coming in with problems like this, but it's a slow process. As Dan said, they have no enforcement power. They in turn go back to the state, and you get the other organizations, which Dan mentioned, into it. It's a slow process, and the property owner has rights. Everybody has rights, and you can't violate the rights. Our old township manager made a few trips out to the property, and you can't enter the property. I was fortunate enough to go out to try to meet the owner of the property on numerous occasions. I was well aware of what's happening there, but you know, you have to follow the laws that are set up. It's a process. You have to do step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to 4 to 5 to get something done, because eventually these problems that can't be worked out ends up in court. So you have to dot your I's and cross your T's and make sure we're doing everything the right way. And we feel your pain, we understand that, and we sit here as a board trying to help people on both sides. We have to weigh the issues of the landowner, what he's saying, versus the resident there. And, you know, I guess we're the judges to some extent with the information that the county brings back and the state brings back. They'll say what the rights are. We're not really equipped to do that. We can say what we think is right or wrong, but that can be challenged in courts. We just have to make sure the process works itself out. And we agree sometimes it's a slow process, but we have to follow the process.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming out.
Thank you, Lori. Appreciate that. Does anybody else wish to make public comment at this time? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move forward. First up on our agenda is we have official action items, in specific our consent agenda. First and foremost, board members, does anybody wish to remove or change any items relative to the consent agenda tonight?
Nope. Yes, sir.
Okay. Then I'll entertain a motion if somebody would like to make one.
Make a motion that we approve the consent agenda for the October 16 work session minutes, October 16 business meeting minutes, treasurer's report, monthly reports for October of 24, bill payments of October of 24, $313,749.99.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Bob?
Bob Andorn, Worcester. Just going to voice my concern again about not having any of the bills that you're paying, not having any understanding of them. In fact, the agenda doesn't even tell us how much money you're spending. You don't even give us the broadest outline of 300,000 or 400,000. So made myself concerned. I don't anticipate that you guys will do anything about it. But it's terribly frustrating for us to try to understand and have some transparent oversight when you don't provide any of that information to us in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate the comments as always. there any additional public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next up, under the section of motions, first and foremost is going to be a motion to authorize advertisement of the 2025 budget. As I mentioned earlier, this is the step we take where we make a motion to advertise, and then there's 20 days that, at least 20 days, that it will be out for public consumption, and then we'll make a decision in December to adopt. We've talked about this a bit in our different meetings over the last few months. Does anybody have any particular questions they want to raise at this juncture on that? And if not, then I will entertain a motion if somebody wants to make one.
I just want to make a comment that
Sure.
I had a meeting with Dan today, and we went over the budget, and understanding this is, it's a lot. Government works different than private business, and he educated me that it's a working, it is a budget we're going to advertise. We can, according to Dan, he says, if we find any challenge or discrepancy, we can make a motion to maybe amend the budget. We'd have to advertise it and vote on it again, but it can be amended. And if that's acceptable, then I'll make a motion that we authorize advertisement of the 2025 budget.
So I'm going to back up just a hair there. So I'm not going to tie a future amendment to the budget to us advertising. They're two true statements, but they're not connected. I guess I don't want the motion to be tied to that. That's all.
I wanted to make my statement that
I hear you.
that we went over a lot, and
Yep.
it can be done. So based on my statement, and I'll stand by, and then I'll just make a motion that we authorize the advertisement of the 2025 budget.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that is on the floor? Bob?
Bob and or Worcester. So first two quick questions. Can you confirm that all of the staff positions for Worcester are fully funded and not reliant on any outside income?
I think the answer to that is yes, if I'm understanding your question correctly, that we're not taking any outside grant money for any FTE in the current.
Brandon, if I understand, you're asking if the normal tax revenues that the township is taking in are funding those positions, or if they're relying on fees of any kind? Would that be an accurate question?
It's specifically related to fees for permits and or zoning permits, that those staff positions are fully funded through the budget and are not reliant on the receipt of any of those fees.
Yes, sir, that would be correct.
Thank you. Number two, can you confirm that in the budget that those items listed as 2023 actual values, which is the first column typically, are final closed out values for fiscal year 2023 revenues and expenditures?
I'm going to defer to Nicole on that, but I'm being told, yes, that is accurate.
Thank you. So I understand the difficulty with producing a budget, and it's reflective of known facts. I'm going to spend X dollars on a particular item, but also should be reflective of past experience. How we did last year, the year before that. And I recognize that you're trying to do it as close to the end of the year so that you capture as many of those costs as you can. However, there's not enough time, and I'm not going to go through it. There are any number of omissions, missing data, incorrect data, bad dates, circular reasoning in the budget document, virtually questions on every page. Are you eliminating the fire marshal position from the budget. I'll answer the question for you, Dan. In one location, you have that was a part-time position, and that for budget year 2025, that position is 0, which means you're eliminating it, but yet in the budget, you have monies allocated for that person.
Sure. So the plan is, at least internally, is to potentially offer that as a stipend position rather than an actual employee position. We're still working with the fire department to identify a good candidate for that fire marshal, but so those funds would be in there as a potential stipend for that position rather than a salary.
Even though they're listed as salary and benefits.
We don't know if that's actually going to happen. We may need to go out and do that still. The goal is to not have to do that, but we're planning a worst case scenario in case we have to.
I guess it would be helpful if you know those things, that you would then somehow identify them in this particular case, so that somebody such as myself would understand what it is your intent is, and that try to clear up the confusion that you've presented. So I've asked through a series of right-to-knows information, specifically identifying hydrant rentals. And so when I say I've been provided information from the township for what our actual expenditures were for the last 4 years, and the values that are shown, this is why I asked the question, for actual 2023 completion do not line up with any of the information that's been provided to me. That's the only line item I've specifically asked for, and that's incorrect. So, or maybe it's not incorrect, but it certainly doesn't make sense to me. I can't add up any of the values to get to that permanent function that's there. So if I think it's this one, then I have to draw the conclusion that it's probably others as well. In addition, I'll just focus on 2 large particular items. A year ago, at this same meeting for the 2024 budget, I brought up that the sewer fund was expected to show a $1 million loss. The anticipated expenditures were $1 million in excess of the anticipated revenue. Filed a right to know, got some information, was told circuitously that I was not understanding where some of those funds were coming from. When you look at the end of 2023, you expended $1.7 million in the sewer fund. And yet, actual numbers which are in this particular budget, show expenditures of $800,000. I raised the issue before, where did the $1 million go? Now, I'm expecting, because of, and I'm limited to what I can see by the information that you present to us. So I'm fighting an uphill battle because I'm only being provided so much information from the township and how it's presented. I have to ask a specific question for a specific activity. Now, I'm thinking that maybe some of that is a capital expense, but you move it to capital fund, there's no accounting for that. How are you tracking those costs? Where those funds are coming from? And so you get federal money that's allocated to some of those functions, and you put it in a capital fund, mixing it with general capital funds. Sewer fund is a separate entity. You get money for that, you can spend it however you want from some other source, but you can't use general township funds to fund the sewer fund. So there's no way of identifying that. And when there's $1 million difference, it's, again, it would seem to me that you would provide that information to us so that we could understand where those funds are coming from and how they're being allocated and they're being used properly. specifically the question I asked before about all of the staff being fully funded and not being utilized with fee structure. Earlier this year, you dramatically increased the fees. Not 2%, not 10%, significantly multiples of hundreds of percent for some of those categories. And I specifically asked before that you either reallocate some of the salary costs from the staff to be reflective of what those costs are, or to seriously consider modifying those figures down to a much more reasonable level. It's essentially a tax. So, you know, you can say we have the lowest tax rate, but if anybody uses those services, then they're being taxed at a significantly higher rate. Again, not going through all of these specific individual line items. Same thing is true with Public Works. There's a significant $800,000 difference between 2023 budget line items and actual expenditures that come through, things that you were projecting in 2024 to 2023. Again, it's possible they may be capital expenses, but how are we to see? Are we just supposed to trust you that you're moving proper capital expenses to the proper category? Overall, you know, the budget is, in my opinion, bloated. It's easy to come under budget here. Every year you come under budget by $750,000 to $1 million because you just put it in the budget and you project that you're going to have that expense and it never comes about. So, I mean, I'm appreciative that we have that extra surplus, but it doesn't seem reflective of good budget management. Budget would be identifying what the cost would be, having an appropriate expense allocated to that, and then moving forward, not, you know, putting in a budget value that's 25 or 35% higher. Anybody can achieve that budget value.
Thank you, Bob. We appreciate your comments as always. Does anybody else? Jim?
Jim Malik, Worcester. I'm a little rusty, so bear with me. You guys on a 10-minute rule? Used to have 5 minutes.
I said 5 minutes, and I do give latitude, Jim, and
You're very generous.
We'll implement the old 2-minute Dr. Malik rule, maybe.
Yeah, the 2-minute rule. Actually, it was a 1-minute rule. Nicole's presentation was outstanding. I looked at the budget. I'm impressed. I would encourage Mr. Andorn to go to the school district and check out their budget and their budgetary process. They are masters of putting an expense out there and then all of a sudden doesn't come through. And we're not talking about 700 grand. We're talking 2-point-something million. And they do it repeatedly. So, you know, in my opinion, they knew they were doing it. The other thing they do at the school district is they operate under something called GASB. And I think GASB, you guys have to operate under GASB as well, right? Well, what happens is you get a budgetary surplus at the school district. So we just had a $1.6 million surplus at the school district. And the capital fund is fully funded. So what they do is it automatically goes to the capital fund. And when it gets transferred to the capital fund, it becomes an expenditure. It's no longer a surplus. So the surplus gets hidden. So I would suggest that if you think stuff here is not quite good, go to the school district, check out that budget and their budgetary process. You guys are light years ahead of the school district. What's the balance in that Nike fund? You remember the Nike fund? Do we still have it?
we do. I think it's maybe 8 or 900,000. Is that the right? We have it in here, Jim. I don't remember off the top of my head.
All right, well, is it in this budget? Because I didn't have time to read through the whole thing.
So it is. So
Okay.
we have a section that lays out some capital reserves, and that is one of the reserve items because it's still an open item, even though
Right. Well,
it's sort of idle. It is still an open item.
whenever they clean it up. When I read the budget, I would look at it right to know. 2023, 0. Is that true? Remember when we were spending 250 grand a year here on Right to Know? 0 in 2023. And then 2024, $1,000. So I got to give credit where credit's due. I mean, your new township manager's okay, you're a good guy. But you got to give credit to Tommy Ryan and our old friend Bob Brandt. Because before those two guys were around, you guys are spending $250,000 a year on Right to Know, and you were getting your butts kicked to boot. So kudos to you guys. There was a question about you going from a salary to stipend position for fire marshal. Is that because if you go from salary to stipend, you don't have to pay benefits to the person?
Yeah, my thought process was we've rarely engaged with our fire marshal.
Right.
It is a very common practice in many municipalities to have a fire marshal on stipend, usually a member of whatever volunteer fire department is covering that municipality. So yes, sir.
So when the person was salaried, you had to pay benefits, right?
Yes, sir.
But if they're stipend, you don't have to.
Yes,
So
sir.
what you're doing is saving us money,
Yes, sir.
right? So that's pretty simple to understand, I think, right? And then, as far as the capital fund versus the general fund and transfers back and forth, the transfers are trackable. You just can't take money from the general fund, put it in the capital fund and not track it. Okay? I was here when Tommy actually separated, because they used to be together. They were in the same, category. Tommy separated them and you guys made transfers to those funds that are trackable. So, and one last thing, payment of the bills.
Yep.
Is there any reason why you can't put the bills up?
So, no. The short answer is no. The longer answer is one of the tasks that Dan has taken on is sort of changing the process with how we do that.
Yeah.
So that we can do a single bill run and it could be in front of this meeting. So all that information could be posted in front of the meeting.
Okay.
So,
So you're working on it?
we are working on it. Bob's comments are fair that
Yeah.
has not been perfect the
No,
last few
I agree with him.
He's correct.
If you're going to vote on the bills, we should see them when you vote on them, that's all. But if he's working on it, good.
It's ultimately just a matter of shifting a lot of the due dates and things like that over time
Yeah.
and making sure those
Right.
actually happen when you ask them to do it, so.
Because if you don't get the right bills in there, it's going to be a problem. I mean, you're going to hear it. So you want to make sure you get that right. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate the comments. Does anybody else wish to make any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Bill McGrain?
Good evening. Good evening, Bill McGrain, Stump Hall Road. So the Navy trained me in project management. So one of the things they trained me in is that when you give a report or a budget, it should be easily understood by laypersons. And so I understand there's typos and not typos, and these things happen. So in the draft budget, in the capital fund, which I'm following right up on Jim, capital fund reserve balances page. Just want to try to grasp what I'm looking at here.
Sure. What page are you on there, Bill, just so I can be on the same page as you? Do you see one at the bottom?
Pages are not numbered. So the capital fund,
At the end. So it's an exhibit at the end. All right. So what exhibit is it, Nicole? Do you know off the top of your head?
so I would agree.
Just want to be looking on the same page you, if you don't mind, Bill. That's all. H. Okay. All right. So I'm with you now.
So there was an attempt made, and I appreciate it, to make the budget more understandable by using, photographs and descriptions and other items for line items. And then there was compilations and accounts. And so I'm just trying to break this page down, is because the first grouping, operating reserve funds, says projected balance 1/1/2025, ends at projected balance 12/31/25. So that's a future statement, okay. It doesn't carry through the rest of the page. All the dating for the following account balances are
2024, if I'm reading it, so.
right. So is this projected balances for all these things?
Is that just a typo? Should it all be 24? Well, it should be 25.
These should all be 20, these are projected balances. All projected balances. Okay, okay.
We can get that corrected.
Needed a little clarification.
That's,
And to follow up Jim's comment,
sure.
not for tonight, but at some time in the future, could we get, a plan of what's going on with the as-called North Penn Army Reserve Base Fund? What's that about? What's the plans for that? Where are
We can. It's a little longer discussion for tonight, but it is,
Exactly, that's-
it's an active, like, dormant process, if that makes any sense with the government. I think you might agree, but it's still an open matter because the land is not clean and we're not going to take it as a result. But we certainly can get some additional accounting detail on what's in that fund and why.
Right, can we get like a roadmap of
Sure.
how do we get this off the books? Maybe would be the words to put. I don't know what the intent is. So what's the intent? I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I can quick jump in on that. So
Okay.
I do have a meeting with our special counsel on that next week. He's had some discussions with PADEP and things along those lines. So we are going to get an update on where this all stands very shortly.
I'm just curious because it's,
Fair enough.
you come to meetings, you hear about it, but you don't, that was information we didn't know. Thank you.
Rick, just to follow up to your questions, you've been coming for a long time. I can't even count 8, 10 managers we've had in the last 15 years. And every time we get somebody in, something changes. Dan has a lot of insight of some minor changes that really help understanding the working of the township from the accounting perspective. He has a background in banking, and certainly that'll help taking care of some of the bookwork and things and the paperwork we have going forward. He came in, and I think to Tommy Ryan's credit, Tommy did a good job. He was on top of a lot of the reports and things. But Dan, working with our staff, is in the process of making, I think, a lot of changes that will address a lot of the comments here tonight going forward.
Effort in making it
Yep,
understandable.
yep.
I just had that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Sir?
My name is Morris Venezia, and I'm from Stony Creek Farms. And I have a question concerning zoning on shipping containers. Is there any type of zoning in this township concerning these shipping containers?
You want to tackle that one, Dan, if you don't?
Yes.
My question is basically, can I bring in an 8x40 shipping container and drop it on my land without a permit?
So,
Do you want
let me
to?
just stop. I do want you to answer him. We're actually taking public comment on the motion on the floor to the budget, but I want to get your question answered as well.
I hate to interrupt that, but I thought I'd get this in before it got too late.
No, can you respond to that, or you want to take it offline?
No, I could do it super quick. Yes, they're accessory structures, and you hypothetically could, if you had the space and the proper setbacks and the proper impervious coverage, we would technically be able to permit it. But if you're asking if the ones in question that I know you're talking about on the site that I know you're talking about, those are not, they do not currently have permits for those.
Because they seem to be appearing dropped off on the site, they're completely red because they just come off a container cargo ship somewhere. And they get painted real nice, real clean. and they kind of like disappear. Now, I think I'm seeing 2 or 3 of them being put together. You put 2 8x40s together, you got a 16x40, you basically have a small home.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I completely
gonna look
understand what you're
into
talking
it.
about. But
It'll
yeah,
be looked
yes, but there is zoning on those types of structures. They aren't just unregulated that
Yeah, I
people
was
can just
wondering
throw
because
around.
they just seem to be popping up.
Okay. So does anybody have any additional, sir, you can just finish typing, you're great. Does anybody have any additional public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor, which is for the advertising of the 2025 budget? You're welcome. Okay, seeing no additional questions, then I will call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay. Next up, we have another motion to consider. This is going to be a motion to authorize advertisement of a fence and cell tower zoning ordinance amendment. Lou, this was one I think you recall a couple months ago, well, more than a couple months ago, we talked about making some minor zoning changes, in particular, a fence height. We talked about increasing that to 72 inches or 6 feet in the rear yard setback. Dan, I'm going to ask you to give a sort of a quick overview of what the changes are that are in that particular amendment, but this is driven out of that discussion. And my understanding is that went through planning. There was a draft amendment. Planning did authorize or voted that we should adopt. And what we're going to be deciding tonight is we're not voting for the specific ordinance tonight. We vote to advertise it, just like we're doing with the budget, so that we could accept it. We could vote to in December to adopt it. So Dan, if you could just fill in some of the pieces on that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So I did go back and look at a number of issues. The initial issue brought to me was that we only allow for a 5-foot privacy fence in back and side yards, when the traditional privacy fence that a resident might see just driving around most municipalities is 6 feet. 5 foot's actually very odd in that they don't generally make a lot of 5-foot fences. They make a lot of 4-foot fences. They make a lot of 6-foot fences. My understanding after analyzing this is that this may have been originally just a mistake, in that the intention was always to allow 6-foot fences of a privacy type. So that this draft essentially changes that to a 6-foot privacy fence. There are some technical details, but that's generally what it is. While we had this issue open, I took the opportunity to go back and make sure that we kind of tightened up some of the other things that were loose in there, things that you may not think are going to necessarily happen, but if they do, people are going to wonder why it's not in our zoning ordinance. Like, you can't have barbed wire on a residential property. We probably don't have any of that right now, but all it takes is one person to decide they want to put barbed wire around their house, and all of a sudden we go, well, it doesn't say you can't, so it becomes an issue. Similarly, like a junk fence, so we don't get a wall of old washing machines and somebody says, well, it's a fence and you didn't say I couldn't do it. Little things like that, they sound silly, but they're in ordinances because they've been done in other places and you just don't want to be caught off guard. Lastly, in front yards, you're allowed to have a 4-foot fence with an open split rail, with a traditional split rail layout right now as it stands, but only like a traditional post and beam split rail. One of the changes I propose in this is to allow just a ratio of 1-to-1 open, which would allow for some different design choices that are still good, still would look good in that area. So a wrought iron fence that has vertical pickets, right now you technically aren't allowed to put those in because it's not a traditional open rail. This would allow for those types of alternative design choices while sticking to the spirit of the original ordinance. So those are really the only major changes. It's not a very complex update, but it does allow, one last thing. There are references to walls elsewhere in the zoning ordinance, but there was no section that actually addressed walls. So there's a section that's been added just to kind of define what walls are and how walls would work, retaining walls and things along those lines. But it was just an omission. I don't like when a zoning ordinance directs you to a term or a phrase and that doesn't exist anywhere else in the zoning ordinance. So this kind of just tightens up the entire ordinance while allowing for that additional fence height. I did run this. We did discuss this at the last month's planning commission. We got a motion to recommend. There wasn't a lot of comments there wasn't any real changes proposed, so I think, you know, with respect, I would like to ask for a motion to get this done.
Thank you, Dan. One comment I'm going to add is I'm going to thank Lou, who actually brought this issue up several months ago. I think there were a couple of instances where residents were looking to do a privacy fence and they wound up having to seek a variance, I think is what sort of drove the original thing. And the idea was if it was a change that made sense and might happen more frequently, that it was a zoning change we could make to save somebody from having to go get a zoning variance for something that was viewed as sort of a common scenario that we might run into. So it always takes longer than we envision with meetings and different things. And certainly thank you to the Planning Commission in terms of offering their input on the matter. So if nobody has specific questions on it, again, we're just voting to, the motion is to advertise. Does any, first and foremost, do either of you have questions on the ordinance itself or comments you want to make?
You have cell tower in here too, so we doing.
So, yeah, I think we just relocated some stuff in the zoning ordinance.
So, yeah, and I apologize, I neglected to mention this. So, right now in our ordinance, we have a separate ordinance section outside of zoning for wireless towers, and it regulates all that. That's not correct. It doesn't give us any ability to enforce it because it's not under zoning. So all this does is take the existing ordinance and move it to a section under zoning to give us the ability to actually enforce that ordinance. So it's literally just shifting it to give us a little more ability to do what we need to do.
Yeah, we didn't make a change to the language. We just moved it to a different place within the zoning code so we have enforceability, is my understanding.
Correct.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Not really, but I'll go with it. I'll make a motion to authorize the advertisement for the fence and cell tower zoning ordinance amendment.
Second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next up, we have other business. Does any board member wish to bring any other business up before the board this evening?
Nope.
Mr. Chairman, just a small item. We had a meeting the other day. I was contacted by the supervisors in Skippack Township regarding ambulance service. And it doesn't seem like it's a big thing, but it really is a big thing. We have a number of ambulance services in the township. They vie for that business, and you don't realize how important an ambulance service is till you really need it in a time of need. Skippack Township has an ambulance service up there. Like everything else in the world, funding's becoming a problem. You can't find volunteers willing to staff the ambulance going out. There's other costs that are being incurred. So they came to the township and they were interested in Worcester possibly contributing to the Skippack Ambulance Fund to help them maintain it and keep it there. As I said, we do have service by other ambulance companies in the township, but it's one of those public service items that we have to look at. It's really important. You know, the fire is important. You have a lot of volunteers there. You don't realize how important the fire company is to the township, so you have it. When I first became a supervisor 20 years ago, it seems, the sitting supervisors thought in order for the fire company to get another fire truck, they needed to have more chicken barbecues. And how ludicrous the comment that was. You know, they're there to protect and serve the residents of Worcester in a time of need. So there was no reason why Worcester doesn't step to the plate and help the fire company out. And I think the past 20 years we've done that. We have a pretty good work relationship with the fire company. It serves the residents. You pay taxes, and when you're in need, these volunteers show up. And now I think the same thing's happening with the ambulance service, that the manager is looking at the information that was presented to us, and at some point, we'll have a conversation, a public meeting about that. But it's something that we're looking at. It's so important for the safety and welfare of the community. Thank you, Dan, for attending the meeting.
Thank you, Steve. So Dan, that's in your plate a little bit to pull some stuff together for us so we can make sure that that gets onto a future agenda and a future meeting that we can discuss that. So anything else? Okay, so last we've got one final public comment. If anybody wishes to make any final public comment, now would be the time. Seeing none, motion to adjourn. Thank you for coming, folks.